We're going to talk about bees. Um, Years ago, some people left on a property in West Texas left a hunting tower out there that was made out of wood. And inside the tower, bees had built a hive. And so my brother and I wanted to move this thing, and we kind of discussed it and everything else. We finally came up with thought was a plan that we'd back up a trailer, and then I would push the stand over onto the trailer, and he would drive off. And by the time we got to where we wanted to be with it, we thought the bees would probably be gone. Um, and so that started the big mistake. Fortunately, one of the things that I typically was doing those days, and I probably should, and I'll do it depending on what else is going on. But in a deal like that, I knew that there might be dust and debris and stuff. And so when I'd get out there working, I'd have a handkerchief around my neck. I'd have like a kind of a thicker shirt. Had jeans. I had gloves on, just because I was working, not for anything else. I had my glasses because at that time I had not had LASIK surgery, so I couldn't see without them, and very well. I mean, like the just to give you an idea, exit signs were just a red dot for me. And I had my hat on, and so I pushed the thing over, and then I just stood there very still because I had heard or something that if you don't move, that the bees won't get you. That was not true. But anyway, so I had, 4 or 5 kind of swirling under my hat, kind of there. And I was holding my breath as much as possible, trying not to move, thinking I was okay. But you still got to breathe. And at some point, one of them stung me on my upper lip. And at that point, it was game on. And so I had bees just all over. I mean, just a cloud of them. And I thought, okay, well, I'll get in the truck. I'll get away from them. Because I still had a truck. He took off with that, but I had another one. But it had a trailer on mine too, because there was 2 of them. We were going to try to get them, but one of them didn't have the bees. So, excuse me. So I got inside the truck, but the mistake I'd made is because it was hot, I had the window open. So the bees were inside there too with me. And at some point, I had knocked off my glasses and all this because, they're stinging you and they're flying and they're stinging and they're flying. And so the next thing that I did was I got out of there and I was trying, by that point, they're actually stinging me and trying to get inside my nose, inside my mouth. I mean, I'm just covered in bees. And at that point, one of the thoughts that I had, because I also work with welding gases, oxygen, acetylenes, that sort of stuff, I thought, if I could just blow them out of my face, that would help a lot. But I knew I had a propane cylinder in the back, but I learned another valuable lesson at that point. It looks like I knocked off the wreath, is that propane cylinders, you can't just turn the valve on. Welding gases, you can. Oxygen, acetylene, you can blow that. So that didn't do me any good. They're still biting and stinging. And the other thing that I didn't know is later my brother told me is that when it fell and he took off, part of the hive landed right by the truck. So we'll get to that in a little bit, but that's important. So, and it's really, there were so many of them that I could literally take my hand with my glove and just do like this and just smear them, and there'd be a whole new group. Just as fast as I could do that, there'd be a whole nother group. So they're now stinging in my nose, it's a cloud. And it's kind of confusing because there's this noise that all you can hear is buzzing and everything else. There's pain because they're stinging you. And so it's hard to even think, concentrate, focus. And so really about that point, I kind of thought I was going to die. Because I could not keep them out of my nose, out of my mouth. And as a physician, I know that if they sting you in your airway and everything, you can swell, and that can kill you. But it wasn't working well. And so emotionally, mentally, I just kind of surrendered. And I basically just started asking forgiveness and thought it was over. And not a word, more of a thought. But something came to me that said, drive. You know, and when it happened, it's not like you sit there and say, I'm going to argue with you, God. But I'm like, I can't see now because my glasses are somewhere. But I got in the truck. It's a Standard and everything. I started up. I put it in gear, and I took off. And I turned on the air conditioner heater, you know, trying to get movement, trying anything I can. And amazingly, though, what really started happening is I was creating a distance between me and the bees, and the numbers were going down. And the other thing is that one of the reasons that logically I didn't want to drive is because I have this trailer I can't see unless it's huge, you know, and I don't want to run over anything. I don't want to crash. But the one thing that was interesting is that my vision was good enough as I was going this way that I could see these standing lines, repetitive lines, and I knew that, okay, that's a fence. And so I just took up there and turned and went this way. And my dad and my brother, who were kind of seeing what was going on, were trying to get back to me because they had taken off. They came back. They'd watched in the rearview mirror, so they got turned around with the trailer, and they had followed me, and now they pulled up beside me. They said, come over here. Well, the problem that I had at that point was that my brother has a lot of allergies to some interesting things. I wasn't sure if he was allergic to bees or not. It may have been part of the discussion. That's why he was driving. My stepfather had a liver kidney transplant, so having him stung by a lot of bees was not a good idea either. And so I was, you know, kind of a little hard-headed, like if anything's going down, it's just going to be me. We're not all going to die here. And interestingly, though, like I said, the numbers came down, and so I went over there with them, and you know, fortunately it's a two-seater pickup, but there's an armrest between the front seats where they were both sitting, and I literally laid down with my head on that seat, my body in the back seat, but laid down with my head on that console, that arm, and they took their pocket knives and shaved stingers off my face. That'll just give you an idea of how much. It's hard to tell you, but how much? A lot. So you'd think that, and that's far enough as I want to go with that, but you'd think that after that experience, I would never want to be around a bee again. In fact, if I smell bee guts, you know, if they've been stung, I get nauseated still. It just triggers. It's kind of, I guess it's a PTSD, but that's oh my gosh, yeah, it makes me nauseated just smelling their guts. But anyway, but we are going to talk about bees and honey. We're going to talk about the Bible with it. So Genesis 1, he creates light and sun, which is important because that's an important thing for bees, is that they have to have this, they need the sun to direct themselves, basically. But in Genesis 1:24, he said it made all the things that are creepy things and the things that fly, and he literally kind of described this, but all the critters out there God created. So then you're going to say, well, how did I become a beekeeper after that? Well, moving forward, at one point I saw a helmet with a mesh at a yard sale, and I bought it. I've done a lot of reading about them, so one of the mistakes that I made right off the bat would have been, if I knew now what I knew then what I knew now, is get away from the bees. Run. The other thing, though, that you can do, and I wasn't thinking, and I didn't, whatever, but if you have a T-shirt, you take the T-shirt up and you put it over your nose and mouth, and that protects that, and then you run. If you didn't do that, you could also take a handkerchief. You know, there's a lot of things that I could have done, and so I'm just trying to protect with, you know, not knowing there's things I could have done, which I should have run. But anyway, so I bought that, and then a friend of mine, I found out, was keeping bees. He's done it in his family, and so he invited me to go and work one of the hives. You got to understand, my anxiety is a little high at that point, but hey, whatever. And so he had me in charge of the smoker. And what a smoker does, it's a device to create smoke, but what it does is it makes the bees think that fire is coming, and they think their hive's going to get burned down. And so they prepare to leave and they prepare to move, and they don't necessarily do that, but they get ready for it. And the way they do that is they start eating the honey. They start ingesting what they can. They start filling up. Just like a newborn baby, after being fed, it kind of makes them a little drunk. A little stupors. It kind of slows them down. You can also, I understand, I have not tried this. In fact, I keep telling myself I'm going to, but it's a little more work. But I understand you can also just spritz them down with sugar water, and they'll do kind of the same thing, because they'll start eating that kind of. But it calms them down. And so I was the smoker, he was doing the work. And it was fascinating because, we gowned up, he totally suited me up so I wasn't supposed to get stung. The other thing you need to learn is bee suits are not perfect. You can still get hit. Just don't think that you're perfect in them. But, so I was the smoker, he was doing the work, and it was interesting because you could listen to the bees and they would tell you how pissed off they were. If it went high pitch, you need to smoke more. If it was kind of a hum, you were good. And so we did this, and I thought, And so that kind of started learning, asking lots of questions, and then moving forward, I don't know, maybe 6 months or so after that, my son came to me and said, I've got a friend who's a PhD student with me at Baylor. She wants to raise bees. Obviously, she can't do that in Waco in the city, and she can't do that on campus and all this stuff. So he said, do you mind if she raises them at the farm? I said, sure. So she and I started reading some more, found her a location. She had the bees. She got married. She left me a hive. She moved. But in the process, I thought she was going to still be there for longer. So I had actually ordered my own hive. We're going to keep 2 hives next to it. So ended up, now I'm a beekeeper. But I'd learned a lot. Now, in Robin Hood, one of the things that he said, the Friar Tuck says, is, I keep them and they keep me. And I think that's probably a good way of discussing a beekeeper. How long have people actually kept bees and raised them and kind of try? I can't say a beekeeper is obviously in charge, but it's not like a sheep or a goat that you can pin. You can't pin 1,000 bees and whatever, it's whatever. But in Egypt, over 10,000 years ago, they have hieroglyphs and everything, and they know that the Egyptians raised bees for honey, and they have pictures of them smoking hives, not smoking, but smoking hives. They have pictures of them, the process of honey raising, and actually in Tutankhamun's tomb they found honey. And the interesting thing is the scientists have looked at this. And I don't know that anybody actually did it, but with their research, you could eat the honey that was in Tutankhamun's tomb. Honey is one of those things that really doesn't degrade. It's kind of interesting. It's a natural preservative by itself. It is. So anyway, so in Israel, because that's what we're going to talk about, at least 3,000 years ago they were keeping hives. And that's 1,000 years before Christ that we know of. Now they could have been doing it longer, and you got to find something that's kind of a little more permanent, or pictures or something. But for sure they know that because an archaeologist found an apiary. That's the big word for the place where you keep bees. This guy had an apiary that was over 100 beehives, and that would mean they had about 1 million bees. And they were made out of clay and straw. That's what they'd used to build the hives. Okay. So, why bees? What do they do for us? Well, they provide food for us in the form of honey. You can actually eat the comb too, but it's really like eating wax, so why would you do it? But it's kind of a nice cheap chewing gum too. You can chew the hive, the comb. The comb also can be used to make all sorts of anything that needs a wax, a paraffin. Candles, for example, the Catholic Church pretty much wants their candles to be made out of beeswax. I can give you 2 reasons for that. One, beeswax burns very cleanly. It doesn't leave a lot of smoke. But the other thing that's interesting, if you make your own candles and you have your own beeswax and you separate it and everything else, is there's still going to be a little bit of honey that's in that wax, unless you really work to purify it. It takes a little work. But with that, then when you start burning beeswax, it has a tendency to make a caramel, sugary smell. So it's pleasant too, but it doesn't leave a lot of smoke, which they don't want in their churches, and it has a sugar and a caramel. They're pollinators. Of the food that you eat in the United States, food grown in the United States, 75% has some sort of pollinator involved, like bees. So if we lost bees, we'd be in trouble. However, bees are also not native to North America. In other words, they were moved here from Europe. Before those people came, there were no honeybees. They're bees, but not honeybees in the United States. So blow your mind on that one. So let's start with, you got to start somewhere in this life cycle. So I'm going to start with a swarm. What is a swarm? If you're a beekeeper, the swarm is one of the best things you could ever run into. Because a swarm is that you've got a group of bees that have the queen and they're moving. I say moving, they haven't reached a destination. So they will be swarmed on like a tree, some kind of structure, and you just see, just thousands of them hanging. And that terrifies you. Like, man, look at all those bees. But the reality is those guys are not out to defend or protect because they don't have a hive. So you see these videos, these people making these beards out of bees. They're using a swarm. So what you may be the most afraid of is actually not something to really be afraid of. I'm not recommending you go and grab a swarm, but you can. I would still put on a mask and everything else just in case something goes sideways, but a swarm is actually a wonderful thing because you can take a swarm, put it in one of your bee boxes, and then you've got a new hive. Done. Because they're actually looking for a new home. What's interesting about bees is they kind of leave before they find their new house. So I'm not saying they're most brilliant, but they're really intelligent critters, and it's funny, but I'm going to tell you, they will leave and there may be a reason. Maybe their hive got knocked over or something and something's bad, but they swarm, they leave. Now, while they're in that swarm, they send out their real estate agents. They send out people to go look for their new housing. And these worker bees will go in and they actually measure the inside. Like if you put a box out for them, you're trying to catch them, or you have a hive. If you have your attic, if you have a place that they can get in, they go in and they measure that place and they decide, is this going to be big enough? Is this the right size? Do we like this? And then they go back to this swarm and they communicate, and then another worker bee goes and measures it. They've got like multiple locations going at the same time. All these real estate people are going out to find out where we're going to move to. And then they come back and agree, and when they all agree, they move. And then they set up shop in the new place. Interesting. They're incredible. They then start in their new environment. They start building comb. That's the six-sided little squares that all link together, that they start putting food and brood, as we call it, food and the babies in there. So what kind of bees are there? What's in the hive? Well, the most important is you have a queen. You have worker bees. Their jobs are to raise the babies, like nursery workers. They're people who are responsible for feeding the queen and feeding the babies. You have drones. Their only job is reproduction. They are raised in the hive, and then they basically go out for mating purposes. At certain times, I don't know what the triggers are, but they know and they do this. But the downside for drones is that when it starts becoming winter, the drones get kicked out. So you're not going to find drones in a hive this time of year. They literally take these guys and just kick them out. Like, we don't need you right now. You're done. Get out of here. You have guard bees, or sentries, or whatever you want to call them. There's the ones that sting you when they get around our hive, but all of them can sting you. In fact, the queen can even sting you. But the problem with that is when they sting you, they have a barbed stinger, and the barbed stinger goes in, and when that happens, they lose the lower abdomen. It comes out, and so that bee is going to die. If you're messing with a queen, she can sting you, but if she stings you, she's going to die. So the beekeepers don't really want that happening because you want the queen. It's important. And then you have forager bees that go out and grab food and pollen and whatever we need. Now, you may ask, well, how do we determine what happens how do we get these different members of this labor force? Well, you got to understand, except for the drones, they're all female. And the other thing that scientists are now starting to really kind of dig in and debate a little bit, and they've got some high technology and stuff like that. But, you know, there's been one thing that I understand, that they literally take cycles of doing certain things, and then, you know, like they work through this pattern through years, and they have these different jobs. And then you have the forager bees. Now, a forager bee, they're kind of like end of life cycle, because the way that a bee generally dies is they only get one set of wings. The wings do not get repaired, and they make thousands and thousands of flights, and at some point those wings wear out. Literally, they get too many holes, they can't fly anymore, and they literally will crash. When they come down, they're done. But they're out working, trying to bring stuff into the hive, but at some point that worker bee, their wings come apart and then they just crash. And then something either eats them or, you know, whatever. But how do you get these different workers? Because that's one, the foragers may be, but there's, like I said, there's some day, and you'll watch the hives, and if they have dead bodies, they scoot them out of the hives. But there's a recent study I found that said that they do it based on temperature. That normal bee temperature is about 34 degrees, and they will take it and they go up 1 degree, and they can get a different type of bee, different, like a worker, a guard, whatever. The way you get queens is they build certain cells and they feed them something called royal jelly, which is something they feed all the hive. The workers feed these, all, you know, if you want to say infants or whatever, all these pupa that are in the hive, they feed them. And so it's just that for a queen, they feed her a lot more and they feed her a lot longer. And so they can actually determine if they're making a queen or not. Now, the thing that you need to know about the queen, though, is it's like that story Highlander, you know, the TV show. There can only be one. There can only be one queen. They'll kill the others. In fact, if you hatch 2 or 3 queens, they'll go in there and fight, and the one that survives is the one that then goes out, mates, comes back, stays with the hive. How long do they live? A queen can live up to 5 years. The worker bees last like around 4 to 6 weeks. They don't live as long. And literally, you've got thousands. So what do they do with this hive? They'll take and bring in pollen. They store it. Pollen's like a protein for them, something they can eat, whatever. But they also take nectar, put it in cells, and then dry it out. And then the more dry it gets, the more it gets thicker. And then once they are happy with it, it's honey, and they seal it. They put wax over it and seal those chambers, because they can open those up later and use them for food. Okay, how do you get a hive? Well, I said you've talked about swarms, but you can also split a hive, which means if it's good weather in the spring, you can take a hive and then take the queen cells, make sure the queen cells are here, give them the things they need, give them the workers, and then go from there. Just a couple of things about how insanely incredible these critters are. If you build a box for them and it's 3/8 of an inch, they love that. That's perfect, because it's a walkway and they can move through it, and they're good with that. You make it 1/4 of an inch, an 1/8 of an inch less, an 1/8, they will seal it. They'll seal the passageway. And they get something that they get from trees and stuff called propolis. It's kind of a glue, and they seal up edges of their hive to keep it warm, but they'll seal a passageway if it's not the right dimensions. If I took a hive and had it here, and then I moved it to about here, that hive could die, because the bees know that location and they can't find it over here. It's like a 4 to 6 feet distance that you can move them. You don't want to move them more than that. Now, if I was moving a hive to Micah, one day I'd move it here, next day I'd come back, move it here, next day come back, move it here, and so forth. So what if Micah lived, miles over there? And that's no problem. If he's like 5 miles, I can just take him. But you can also take them and then move them back. So if I wanted to have them up like in the front and take me 20 days to do them, I'll just go take it, leave it somewhere else for about a week, and then pull it back. Because by then they get totally reoriented. But yes, they will get disoriented based on you moving them if you move too far too fast. Their body, I want to talk about wings and stings. I talk about the stinger. Their wings are fascinating because they can separate the wings. They have four wings. They can separate the two. They can take their body and separate them. They have got little hooks, and so they can do that. When they hook them together, they can fly. When they're unhooked, they can move, but the wings don't move, the big ones. Why is that important? Is there any kind of air conditioning or heating in that hive? No. They have to provide that. So they will fan the hives in the summer to keep it cool. In fact, if you see a hive, and if you're a new beekeeper, you freak out. There's something called bearding. And what's bearding is that there are bees on the outside of the hive trying to cool it down. And they're all moved outside. And those guys have their wings fully moving. Inside the hive, they'll have them fully moving. When it gets cold, they want to heat it up. And so the way that they heat up the hive is they dislocate the wings so they can shiver. A bee has told you that they control the temperature for the young to be produced. A bee can elevate their own body temperature 10 degrees. They can go from 34 Celsius to 30 to 44. That would be lethal for almost every creature you can name. And I'm going to explain why they do that. Our body temperature is 98.6. If we went up to 108.6, we would all die. Fact. You're not going to make it there for very long. I think the highest temperature that a human being has made externally was like 107 and survived. Yeah, it's crazy. So bees make that temperature. Why? Because what they will do then is, and they have actually had beekeepers who didn't know this, and this is some new science, but based on thermal models that they can do, is that a bee will heat up and have an open, like let's say that these are all combs, these chairs are all combs. And so let's say, I like the red. We'll stay with Micah with the red. So Micah's the bee that got to 10 degrees higher. He'll climb in a comb and then heat up all the bees around him. And he climbs out when he's cooled off, and another bee gets in and does the same thing. So they will shiver, get 10 degrees higher, climb in there and heat that whole area up. And that determines the different roles for some of the bees. Scientists are finding some of this stuff. Blow your mind. They're incredible. Okay, so get all that because I want to then get into stuff about the Bible. Everybody heard of the prophet Deborah, or the judge Deborah? Her name means bee. She's a really important figure because she, if I'm not mistaken, I didn't have time to dig into Deborah a lot, but in my brain, y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think she's the one that when they kind of came back, she's the only one that could actually read the scrolls to them. So she's an important figure, and she also did a lot of teaching, like in the areas in front of the city. People would come to Deborah, and she would teach them. So she's kind of acting like a queen bee. So if you think of Deborah, queen bee teaching, important. Let's go through some just passages, and then we're going to get into. I'm going to talk about two specific passages, and we're going to get a little deeper into that because I think it brings a lot of fun to the story. But some of these I'm just kind of going through because we can kind of get this. But Proverbs 16:24. Pleasant words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the body. Proverbs 24:13. My son, eat honey, for it is good, and the drippings of the honeycomb are sweet to your taste. Oh, and I forgot, we need to throw another thing in here about using honey as food. Can the Jewish people eat honey? Is it kosher? It has to be. They moved in the land of milk and honey. However, the bees are not kosher. They're considered unclean. The honey is made from nectar, which is clean. Now, if the bees made it and regurgitated or whatever, then you couldn't eat it. But the bees are basically putting nectar in, and then it's okay. The process makes it kosher. Blow your mind. Matthew 3:4. Now John the baptizer, John the Baptist. Now John wore a garment of camel's hair and a leather girdle around his waist, and his food was locusts and wild honey. I just realized I forgot something. Pastor Beeman, would you go get something out of my truck for me? It's parked right here. In the front seat on the passenger side, there is some honey grams and some honey. Little bottle of a box of honey grams and a bottle of honey. Because this is also show and tell. I'm going to feed y'all too. So John, the baptizer, lived off of locusts and honey. Now the house of Israel called its name manna. I don't know if we've had this discussion, but manna, what manna literally translates into is, what is it? So when God produced manna from heaven, they would go and say, what is it? What is it? What is it? Manna, what is it? So they ate, what is it? But here they're talking about, now the house of Israel called its name manna. It was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey, which Pastor Beeman can give you wafers made with honey, and he can give you honey to put on it. There's the honey. Texas honey, by the way. You have to also be careful, because when you're going into stores and buy some of the stuff is not really honey. So you need to read and make sure that it has honey. Okay, well, here you can pass this around. Here, Micah, if you want a honey made graham, and there's your honey if you want. But yeah. Okay, Ezekiel 27:17. Judah and the land of Israel traded with you. They exchanged for your merchandise wheat, olives, and early figs, honey, oil, and balm. One other thing about honey that is interesting, and I'm not going all out on this, but I'm just saying, honey, sugar, some of the things that have a lot of that can be used. I'm not recommending this, but they can be used on wounds because they will keep the bacterial counts down. You can put them in a wound and they'll do that. But the problem is, because it's with bees and everything else, you could get soil organisms in the womb, so it could be a problem. But if you had really pure honey, it's actually something that can be used that way. As far as 2 Chronicles 31:5, when they're talking about the temple, it said, as soon as the command was spread abroad, the people of Israel gave in abundance the first fruits of grain, wine, oil, honey, and all the produce of the field, and they brought in abundantly the tithe of everything. So honey's acceptable as a tithe for your church. So let's go to the story of Joseph. Remember, Joseph was the coat of many colors. The brothers were jealous. They were going to kill him, but they changed their mind. They threw him in a pit. He was sold into slavery. He ends up to be number 2 man in in Egypt. Well, they are having a famine, and they come up there. And so Joseph figures out who these guys are. He doesn't let them know. And, Joseph's got this makeup and looks like it's been years, So he tells these guys, oh, how do I know that you're not really spies? Tell you what, I'll jail one of you, and if you will bring back your youngest brother, the baby boy, then I will let this other one go, and, whatever. So these guys are all distraught, go to their dad and explain all this. Well, Simeon gets kept behind. Judah was the oldest, so we got all these names of the people. But then when Israel, their father, said to them to go back, if it must be so, in other words, if you got to take Benjamin and you got to go get Simon, then do this. Take some of the choice fruit of the land in your bags and carry down to the man, Joseph, a present, a little balm and a little honey, gum, myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds. By the way, I'm going to actually give you your Christmas joke. When the wise men gave baby Jesus frankincense and gold, what did they say to them? But wait, there's myrrh. So, in 1 Samuel 14, this is one of those times when, if you're a leader, you might watch your mouth, because you kind of run off a little bit, things can be problems. Saul was getting his troops ready for battle, and he basically said, if any of you folks get caught eating anything today, you're going to be punished. I don't know how much punishment, but he basically said, none of you will be eating today, okay? Nothing for you guys. And the men of Israel were distressed that day, for Saul laid an oath on the people, saying, cursed be the man who eats food until his evening, and I am avenged on my enemies. So none of the people tasted food, and all the people came into the forest, and there was honey on the ground. And when the people entered the forest, behold, the honey was dripping. But no man put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath. But Jonathan had not heard his father charge the people with the oath, so he put forth a tip of the staff that was in his hand, dipped it in the honeycomb, put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes became bright, meaning that he was hungry, and now I'm feeling better. Then one of the people said, your father strictly charged the people with an oath, saying, cursed be the man who eats this food this day. And the people were faint. Then Jonathan said, my father has troubled the land. See how my eyes have become bright because I tasted a little of this honey. How much better if the people had eaten freely today the spoil of their enemies, which they found. For now the slaughter amongst the Philistines has not been great. So anyway, maybe that wasn't a good thing for him to say, and they actually had revenge and did whatever because Jonathan said it's okay to eat, but Dad said no. You deal with that however you want to. The next one in Psalm 81:16, and this one's fascinating, and we're going to get into a little bit. Like I said, this is one of the little ones, but I've got two more big ones. I would feed you, Psalm 81:16, the finest of the wheat, honey grams, and with honey from the rock I would satisfy you. Wait a minute. Honey from a rock. We'll get back to that. Psalm 19:7. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The ordinances of the Lord are true and righteous together. More to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and drippings of the honeycomb. Honey from the rock, does that happen? No. Does water come from rocks? No. But yes, it did. So they can say this. They can say, God can give you honey from a rock because God gave us water from a rock. So it's okay. It's a miracle thing, but it could happen. So when you read that, wait a minute, honey from a rock? There are bees that can move into crevices and do this sort of stuff. It's totally acceptable. It could happen. In fact, it's probably easier to say you can get honey from a rock than water from a rock, but so there you go. So don't totally throw that out going, what, they're crazy, but it still could work. Psalm 119:103, how sweet are thy words to my taste, sweeter than honey to my mouth. Now we're getting into the love passages where that things really go crazy because they really, Song of Solomon. Your lips distill nectar, my bride. I told you, what is honey? Distilled nectar. Honey and milk are under your tongue. The scent of your garments is like the scent of Lebanon. Ooh, wow. And this one, and we understand the language, but it just sounds today, to modern ears, really twisted. But I come to my garden, my sister, my bride. No, he's not saying that she's his biological sister. It's just a term, I gather my myrrh with my spice. I eat my honeycomb with my honey. I drink my wine with my milk. Eat, O friends, and drink. Drink deeply, O lovers. Here is a precaution about what you do. Proverbs 25:16. If you have found honey, eat only enough for you, lest you be sated with it and vomit it. You eat too much of a lot of things, your stomach doesn't like it. Like the gallon challenge you're talking, you eat a lot of honey, it's got a lot of sugar, everything, you may be throwing it back up. So they're saying don't do that. And so Proverbs 25:7, it is not good to eat much honey, so be sparing of complimentary words. It's just like the honey, don't feed too much either. Dr. Beeman, I like your shoes. Dr. Beeman, those are wonderful socks. Dr. Beeman, that's a great time. You know what I'm saying? Yes. So be careful with that, on the receiving and giving end, probably. So, the two big ones I really want to talk about was the Jonathan passage, but the other one we're going to get to is Samson. Then Samson went down to Timnah and saw a woman in Timnah, one of the daughters of the Philistines. So he came back and told his father and his mother, I saw a woman in Timnah, one of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore go get her for me for his wife. Now, remember, Samson couldn't cut his hair, and he was not supposed to touch anything dead, right? Because the strength was in his hair, and he wasn't supposed to touch dead things. one of the Nazarite. Anyway, there's a group of people that still are kind of like that. The Nazarites, I think. So he came back to us, whatever. Then his father and his mother said to him, "Is there no woman among the daughters of your relatives or among all your people that you go to take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines?" But Samson said to his father, "Get her for me, for she looks good to me." However, his father and mother did not know that it was of the Lord, for he was seeking an occasion against the Philistines. Now at that time the Philistines were ruling over Israel. Then Samson went down to Timnah with his father and mother and came as far as the vineyards of Timnah, and behold, a young lion came roaring towards him. Now, here's the interesting thing that I think the artists go crazy with Samson, because they show the guy who's buff. Yeah, that doesn't make the story nearly as good if he's a scrawny little guy. We don't know what Samson looked like, and obviously people didn't think that Samson was that strong. So this scrawny guy gets attacked by this lion. So what does scrawny guy do? The Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, so that he tore him as one tears a young goat throat. He had nothing in his hand, but he did not tell his father or mother what he had done. He ripped this thing apart. Now, another story that's a true story that I'm going to go through just because I want to talk about the lion a little bit. When I was in Africa, one of the missionaries that I ran across, he said he was driving his Land Rover and he ran into a group of Maasai men, and they're beat up. I mean, scratched, cut. One of them is holding his intestines in, and so he's like, "I'm going to Nairobi, get in, we'll take you." And he said along the way they start telling him the story. And the Maasai are different than us. If you throw a lion in the room, the Maasai are going to go kill that lion. I mean, they'll take tables, chairs, everything, and they're going to kill that lion. If they throw a lion in the middle of this room, guess what's happening? Beeman, Micah, we're all running. We're going to get out of here. We're not all going to go attack, we're going to run. So this young man gets attacked by this lion, and he catches him by the ears. So the lion can't bite him, but he's holding on for dear life. And his friends are taking sticks and everything and beating the lion, and they run, if they're close enough, they run into their bomas, their home, bring out a spear. They kill the lion. In the aftermath, nobody died, but they're hurt. And so he picks up these guys and he's driving them to Nairobi very quickly. He's not medical. He said, "I'm about to pass out because of the blood," and And at one point he feels bad for this guy and he thinks, "Well, I have some Panadol." It's like Tylenol. So I gave the guy Tylenol. Big mistake, because the other guys found out they had to stop and give them all Panadol. Because you gave it to him, why didn't you give it to me? I have pain too. So he drives them home, takes them there. He said they all survived. They were able to, surgeons able to put this guy back together, clean him up. And he said within like a day or two they were gone, because they don't stay. But that is a gesture that means a lot. So imagine Samson by himself taking this lion and just ripping it apart. Just no sticks, no spears, one man. Lion dies. Okay. So he went down and talked to the woman, and she looked good to Samson. When he returned later to take her, okay, it says later. He turned aside to look at the carcass of the lion, and behold, a swarm of bees and honey were in the body of the lion. So he scraped the honey into his hands and went on eating as he went. When he came to his father and mother, he gave some to them, and they ate it. But he did not tell them that he had scraped the honey out of the body of the lion. Okay? So, how did this all happen? Because I started looking on the internet, even as a beekeeper, and the people have a theory, and I have to totally agree. Number one, it says later. It didn't have to be that day, that week, This is like a wedding arrangement. This could have taken months. So with that carcass, if Samson's opened it up, the buzzards are going to come in and clean it up, and then the other bugs and the maggots and everything are going to go after it. So when they're done, what does it look like? And I've looked at carcasses before of cows and stuff. So you got these ribs, and then you've got a hide stretched over it. Perfect hive. Swarm finds it because what they do, and a lot of beekeepers give them something that we call frame that already is like this, and it has little patterns of the honeycombs, and they just build off of it. But if you do that with native bees, they'll start from the ceiling like here, and they start building the comb and dropping it down. So the bees took the carcass of the lion and started building on the ribs. Perfect spacing, drops down, and they were building comb and had honey in there. Now, how come Samson didn't get totally stung? I don't know. Maybe he got lucky, whatever. I don't know why he wasn't just a swarm after him, because they're going to defend their home. But then the other thing is different hives have different temperaments. Some are nicer than others. So where's the problem with Samson with this honey? Was the animal, was it a live lion or dead lion? He's not supposed to touch unclean things, dead things. That's why he didn't tell his parents, because they've been really upset. You poisoned us. The honey wasn't the problem. Where it came from was the problem. And so then his father went down to the woman, and Samson made a feast there, for the young men customarily did this. When they saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him. Now understand, this is not a wedding. Your brain may go to a wedding. No, this is a preparation for getting married. And so there's 30 guys there. And then Samson said, let me propose a riddle to you. If you will indeed tell it to me within the 7 days of the feast and find it out, and I will then give you 30 linen wraps and 30 changes of clothes. So I just said there's 30 guys. So that means each one of them has to give him, a change of clothes. So for Samson's got a month worth of clothes. He's filling up his closet. If he wins, if he loses, he has to give them one each. Well, so he said, out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. But they could not figure out the riddle for days. Then it came about the fourth day, they said to Samson's wives, entice your husband, who's not really your husband yet, your fiancé, so that he will tell us the riddle, or we will burn you and your father's house with fire. So have you invited us here to this party to impoverish us? Is this not so? So then you go from there, and she weeps before Samson, and he ends up telling her, and then she tells them, and then he kills a bunch of their Philistine people, and he takes their clothes, and he pays off his debt, and then they marry the girl gets married off to somebody else and not Samson. But Samson's wife had given to his companion who had been his friend. Not a fun story. So there is a lot of symbolism within that, though. I talked about, he's not supposed to be touching the dead and everything else. But in other words, the story of Samson has a destination, and this is what Samson as a judge was made to do, and this was what he was supposed to be there for. And so even marrying the Philistine was supposed to be a way to get him in with the Philistines, right? He ended up falling for Delilah too. We know how that worked out. But it was the whole story was there, but his parents wouldn't have known that. They would have been really unhappy about the honey if they knew where it came from, etc. But there's also another thing, is what was the name of the land that they were supposed to possess? I'm going to leave you with this thought. I will give you a land of milk and honey. So, honey in the Bible, not wasps, not bees. Because another reference in there was that like, the nations they were fighting were so many, like a swarm of bees, like that how many they were talking about. And so there's the other thing that's interesting is they talk about how that, this may be a little tiny, what you'd consider insignificant insect, but it has tremendous power as a group and sticking together. So there are things as churches we can learn from the bees in so many ways. But, they talk about the goodness of God and sweet as honey, and words are sweet. They talk about honey in Revelation. I think I read somewhere there's over 60 references to either honey or bees or something in the Bible. Now, the interesting story, though, here is I told you about commercial beekeeping. None of the stories in here are about commercial bees. These are wild bees. The wild bees in the carcass, the wild bees that Jonathan found, that's where they got the honey. It was wild. It was not. So the land did flow with milk and honey. Now, they also probably kept them and stuff anyway. But anyway, any last thoughts, questions? Heavenly Father, we thank you for these incredible little creatures that produce for us, but also we need them just like they need us. And we thank you for having us learn things that you have written between the pages, because we know that there's no way that a hive moved right into the carcass of the lion. So therefore we know it took time for that whole process to happen. And so we for a beekeeper who reads the story, he says, wait a minute, this doesn't work this way. But it does if you can give it time. And so in the fullness of this, you gave us a time scale without ever having to tell us, well, it took this long and that long. We could actually probably figure that out. But we thank you for your love, for your sweetness that you provide us. Your word is as sweet as honey. We thank you for us as a church who can live like a hive, can move in together, can work together, can do things that normally any one of us could not do, but as a hive, we're a formidable force. All these things I thank you for and pray in Jesus' name, amen.